Don't mind the camera. Come around the table, please. All right, you can. I'll move this garbage can so you can look over the edge as well. Ouch. Please don't move the camera because that's for so you can watch this later when you're excited. Why don't you stand over here, gents? That way it'll work. Okay, so watercolor, doing watercolor. So the first thing you need is watercolor paper. All right. Now it's important actually because watercolor paper, as you see, has those kind of like little bumps on it. Anybody want to feel, or you take my word for it? Right? And if you look very close, it's got the bumps on it. So the reason it has the bumps is so that the water can kind of like collect in between the little bumps. It helps the paint stick, right? Also, watercolor paper is like heavier and stronger and designed to kind of take water. Like a sheet of drawing paper will not do that as well. It'll get all warpy and funny. All right, so just to review, I just kind of grabbed a scrap, cut the watercolor paper. I want to make sure I can see there we are. There we go, right? And cut it down. Now today, we're just going to do something simple. So work with small. Your goal is to either A, try some techniques that you haven't learned yet, or B, if I show you something you already know, then to see if you can get better and better at it. All right? So there we go. I cut some paper. Now I hope you remember that with the watercolor, you need to tape it down. You need to tape it down on all sides because what happens is paper is made out of fiber. And as the fibers get wet, they get bigger, right? They get filled up with water. And what happens is it starts to kind of warp, makes kind of those dips and loops and things like that. And so, which is fine. It's supposed to happen. It'll happen while you're painting, all right? But when it dries, if you don't have it taped down, well, no, you tape it so that when it dries, it stretches back out and it dries flat. If you don't tape it down, then it dries wavy, which maybe is what you want. But I don't know very many artists that say, yes, I want my watercolor paintings to be wavy when I hang them in the gallery. So, just I think this yellow tape is the best, but there's lots of tape in there, whichever works. This stuff, this like craft tape is awesome, with the exception of it takes forever to like peel it off. If you're one of those people who finds peeling things satisfying, I've got a bunch of boards for you. You know, you can have fun to no ends for as long as you like. Michelle is one of those people. Okay. Now, I think this is important. We talked about like the different qualities of pencils when we were working on the drawing unit, right? And we're saying, oh, the ones with the B's, right? They have a lot of graphite in them. They make a nice dark mark. And the ones with the H, right, or make a really gray mark. This is where it's sort of important, right, for a different reason, all right? You want to use a hard pencil when you're sketching before you start drawing because the harder pencils, I have a 6H here, the harder pencils they're lighter. You can't see them as easily underneath the color, and they don't run as much. So you'll see it. Try it sometime for fun, right? Get like a 6B and make a couple marks, and then put some water on it, and that graphite will spread all over the paper and leave this kind of grayish wash there if you want, all right? So if you don't want that effect, use a hard pencil. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to do something super random here. Let's see. I don't know. This is like my go-to thing. Even though it's not summertime anymore. So maybe I shouldn't be doing lotus flowers. A little off, but you get it. All right, so there we go. I made my sketch, right, with a 6H pencil. All right, so I told you before, I personally prefer the cakes. All Right? Now there's a little bit of difference in quality. I think that the tubes that we have are a little bit better quality than the cakes, but if you get good cakes, there really is no difference, right? It's really about personal preference. And so I hope you remember too that what you got before you start using them, you've got to kind of make them run a little bit, right? You got to get them wet and get them soft. And you just kind of like, chill out. And we're going to chill out by talking about the tubes. So if you want to do the tubes, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to pantomime. I hope you recall what you do is if you get a tube like this, kind of squeeze all the paint to the end. It'll make your life happier and more fun. And then you open it up, squeeze a little bit in there into the palette, put a little bit of water in there, right? So that you can use it either thick or thin. All right? So that's the way you use the tubes. Unfortunately, we seem to have a lot of dirty palettes here. This one I'm very disappointed at. This is the one I picked at random, and that is straight up yucky. So I'm going to do what I can to clean it off right now. And not great. So when I'm painting, I always, with both like watercolor and with when I'm using ink, I like to have an extra little piece of paper sitting off by the side. So I, one, know what color I'm about to put down on my paper, and two, I can sort of dry my brush off sometimes, because I'm sure you've noticed that sometimes that brush can get really wet and you're thinking, oh, I just want to put a little dot of color here, and you do it, and then all of a sudden the water goes, right? And then you get all upset, right? So you can use the extra piece of paper to kind of dry your brush off as well if you want a more refined line. Okay, I'm just going to show you 4 things today, right? And I'm not really, I'm just kind of going to show you an approach to putting the paint on the paper. There's more to the technique, but it's better to start here. All right, so the first thing I want to show you is called a wash. Sorry for you who are in front of me, because it's upside down. But you're a smart kid.
All right. Wash.
Oh, you're right. No, it says wash. W-A-S-H.
That's an E.
That's an A. Trust me, I wrote it.
You don't
I do the typing E, right? So check it out. Here's what my E looks like. Washy. Washy, washy. All right. So check it out. Just going to put a little bit of orange paint. That was a bad choice. Not orange paint. I'll save that for later. A little bit of, see, this is also good for cleaning off a dirty palette, even though it's still really dirty. All right, so I'm going to put a little bit of blue paint in there. It's going to be a little green because there's some green left in there. And a wash is just a thin field of color, thin space of color. The watercolor, like one of the cool things about watercolor is it's supposed to be translucent, right? It means you should be able to see through it. If you want something that's opaque, we use a different paint. And a wash is just super translucent. And there we go. It's just really like a thin field of paint. If you're careful, you can make it set right up on the edge of something if you like. Now, one of the neat things about a wash is that, you know, you can start by putting some paint down and then reach in there and get some water and pull it down so that you get sort of a gradation, right? Or if you want to mix colors, this is going to make an ugly color, right? You can put a wash next to each other and you just kind of mix it right in there on the paper. Wash. All right. Now, the next technique I'm going to show you is called dry brush. All right. Dry brush is exactly the opposite. Now, your brush isn't dry. It's not intended on being dry, right? But it's as dry as you get it while it's still wet. And this is where your scrap piece of paper comes in handy. All right. Dry brush, instead of using paint out of the palette, you want to kind of pick it up, for me, right in the cake, right? Because I want it to be really thick in there. Now, there's a lot of water in there, so it's not going to be really thick. So I'm going to kind of dry it off a little bit on my scrap piece of paper. I highly suggest, when you use a scrap piece of paper, use the same paper that you're doing for the watercolor, because you want to have this, you want to know exactly what's going to happen when you set that brush down. And if this is a gray piece of drawing paper, right, and you say, oh, that's a great color, you put it on your white watercolor paper, it's not the same. It doesn't have the same effect. Right, let's see if we can get a good bit of nice dry brush here. Dry brush is really good for lines, all right? But you can also tone fields into it. Watercolor has that effect of not always being even. So if you want like a really solid opaque area, watercolor is going to let you down, or it's going to be real tricky. All right, so let's see here. Not put my arm in it. We'll see, Sally. All right, so you can see the color is thicker. It's probably going to blend a little bit there. The color is thicker, and what I really like about watercolor, especially with this kind of brush, is you can be very expressive with your line, right? You can get lines that are in between thick and thin just as you do it. It depends on your speed and how much you push the brush down and things like that. But there's like a nice like emotional quality to it. Now, you can even get darker than this, than what I've drawn. Especially with the tubes. This is one of the advantages of the tubes, I think. Okay, so you can see I'm getting like a darker color. All right, so that's dry brush. Now, the next one I'm going to do for you is called wet on wet. And I'm going to have to use my wet wash area here. Okay, let's see if it works. That's kind of a wet on wet effect. Wet on wet is where you put down a wash, all right, and you've got like this wet field of color, and then you go in with a dry brush and you add some things. Now, it's going to run, all right? It's going to spread out as you make it, and you'll get like a heavier line with a little bit of running off the side, right? Which is, you know, use that to your advantage. That's something cool. I don't know. We'll just do some wavy lines here. All right, so you can see how that works. You can even get in there and sometimes touch it up a little bit. It's like, this is my river. Yeah. Now, there we go, wet on wet technique. Now, this doesn't quite do it justice, all right? And part of the reason it doesn't do it justice is because with watercolor, you can go and make multiple layers. You have to stop about like 3 or 4. And, you know, with 3 or 4 layers, you've gotten about as much paint as you can get on the surface. But I'll do this, right? And then I'll let it dry. And then I might come back in here and do a dry brush and get more specific detailed lines, right? Or maybe I'll add a little bird flying up over there. I've got like some dry brush things here, and if I want to add a tone to this, I want to let this dry and then go back and go over the top of it. Now, something you can do that I'm not going to show you today is called glazing. And glazing is where you put a color down, very thin color, and you let it dry, and then you go back and you put another color down, and those two colors actually mix right on the paint, like optically mix. As the light goes in, bounces off the paper, and comes back to your eye, changes color. But you got to let it dry in between. I'll show you that another day. It's fun, though. Or you can look it up on the internet. So here we have Sherry's painting, who she said she didn't want it, which is great, because I'm going to paint on it. Now here's another technique. I hope my water's clean. My water might not be clean. You want to use clean water when you do this, But for expediency's sake, I'm just going to do it like this. All right, now this is really good if you're planning to do something very specific, right? And you want to make sure that you get it exactly right. So you kind of, I don't know what this technique is called, no clue. What you do is you put the water down first, all right, and you're very careful about where the water goes. And then you can mix your color, whatever color you may want. I'm going to give her, is green too creepy? I know, that's why I'm saying is green too creepy. Here, let's do this kind of rose color. All right. So now all I'm going to do is when my brush is loaded up, I'm just going to put a little paint in there, and it'll spread to exactly where the water is, but not like run away on you. There's all kinds of fun Instagram videos, or maybe even in TikTok these days, right? Where they do this, where they like paint a bird all in water, and it just looks like paper, and they put the paint down, it goes, whoosh, and it turns into a bird. You say, ooh. If you want to do that, go ahead. All right, so there's that. All right, so your goal today is to have a good time with watercolor. Now I'm going to give you, you should probably, how much time we have? We have lots of time, right? Yeah, we have loads of time. You have at least one challenge on subject matter, and then the other ones you can do for yourself, all right? You should do at least like 2 or 3 little paintings. I think one of the challenges with watercolor is that you can't start to finish. You got to paint, and then you got to like chill out. So get yourself a board and maybe put 3 pieces, small pieces of paper on it, so that you can start one, and then you turn your board and do another, and then turn the board, do a third one, then go back to the first. At the very least, you have to take one symbol from our research, right? From our Chinese symbol research, and you have to paint at least one of those symbols, be it yours or be it something on the Padlet, something that makes you happy, okay? Okay? Yes, that's a yes? Excellent. All right, last thing I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to let you get to work. It kind of doesn't matter which brush you use. It does matter, but there is such a thing as specific watercolor brushes. However, I think it's more important for you to try some different brushes out and figure it out, right? Now, I am older than you, and I have come to really like these Asian-style brushes, right? I like the Chinese brushes in specific, actually. I think Chinese brushes are great. So I use these almost exclusively with ink and watercolor. But you don't have to do like I do like you do. And if you don't know what you do, then try different things out and look for something that feels right for you. Okay? Yes, all right. I see a couple of nods. That's all. Have fun. Make some paintings. Do some watercolor. Laugh and have a good time with it. And I will